Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. Nowadays, we're able to communicate better than any other group of people in history. Cell phones make it possible to talk with loved ones instantly, even if they're on the other side of the planet. The internet, in addition to allowing us to communicate directly with others, also gives us access to all of humanity's collective knowledge. But all of the communication systems that we rely on now are frighteningly fragile. They rely on a complex infrastructure of towers, satellites, cables, and electronics that are all vulnerable to a wide range of threats. Weather events can severely damage equipment in your area, and that could prevent you from being able to reach loved ones or call for help. Something more severe like an EMP or cyber attack could knock out these services over a wide area, and that disruption could last for a very long time. So today we're going to be talking about ways that you could communicate with loved ones or other members of your survival group if we were to lose access to modern cellular and internet communications. We're going to be talking specifically about radio communications, going over the differences between some of the more common methods available, and to help us with that, we're going to be using the Retevis RA86. So I'd like to thank Retevis for sending us a couple of radios to use and for sponsoring this video. Now when it comes to radios, three of the most common kinds are FRS or Family Radio Service, GMRS, which is what the RA86 is, and ham radio. There are more out there, but these are the three that we're going to be sticking with today. FRS is probably the most basic kind of radio out there, and it's what most people think of when they hear the phrase walkie-talkie. These are only useful for a very short-range communication, and there's a couple reasons for that. First off, they're limited to only 2 watts, and you cannot upgrade the antenna on them. And when you buy these, you may see advertised ranges of 30 miles or more, and that's going to be completely unrealistic in most situations. Things like buildings, trees, and hills are all going to reduce this, and while that's true for all radios, it's especially problematic when you have such limited wattage and you cannot upgrade your antenna. The next level up in power is GMRS radios, and the RA86 that we have here is a 20-watt mobile radio. It comes with the radio base, handheld speaker mic, a power cable, a 2.1 decibel gain antenna, mounting hardware, and some other accessories as well. Being a mobile unit, it's designed mainly for off-roaders and farmers for vehicle-to-vehicle communication. However, if you have a solar generator, you can plug the power cable into its 12-volt port and power the radio from that. And I think that's very good if you're wanting something that can be used as a backup power source during a long-term situation. If you no longer have access to your vehicle, then you can just switch it over and run it from that solar generator instead. The radio is controlled totally from its microphone, so that means you can mount the radio's base anywhere you want to. You could mount it on your dashboard, on the side of your center console, down near where your legs are, or just do what I'm doing and keep it inside the center console itself. You can use the microphone to adjust volume, change channels, control power levels, and a whole lot more. And one kind of cool thing is that you can change the color of the display if you want to. The radio also has a dual speaker, meaning you can hear from both the handheld microphone and the radio base itself. You'll be able to access 22 channels, including 8 repeater channels, and being able to use a repeater is probably one of the biggest advantages that GMRS radios have over FRS and MERS radios. If you're not familiar with what a repeater is, it's kind of similar to if you have a larger home and you need a Wi-Fi booster so that your Wi-Fi can reach all over the house. It's kind of like that, but on a much larger scale. If you have a good network of repeaters and your GMRS radio can hit those, then you could potentially be able to communicate for hundreds of miles in some circumstances. Now, the problem is that you'll have to find them in your area, you'll need permission to use them, or you'll have to set up your own repeater network. Another nice thing about GMRS radios is that they can communicate with FRS radios. So if you have any just cheap walkie-talkies, you'll be able to use those together if you want to. Just be sure that you clear out any privacy codes so you don't have any issues hearing one another. The RA86 comes with this 2.1 decibel gain antenna, which is okay for communicating short distances. However, this is probably something that I'm going to upgrade in the future, and I'll explain why in a minute. But another nice thing about this radio is that you'll be able to pick up the NOAA weather stations. These are nice to tune into if you're expecting bad weather in your area or there's some other disaster happening. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that this is a 20-watt radio, but it's important to understand that that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have like 10 times the range range of a 2-watt radio. There's a lot of factors that go into determining how far you can communicate and how clear those communications are, and one of those things is going to be terrain. Take where I live, for example. We have a lot of trees, a lot of houses, and several hills between my house and where my parents live. And our maximum communication distance in that environment using the setup straight out of the box was only around 1.5 miles. It also doesn't help that there's not that much of an elevation difference between us. We might have some hills, one's a little bit higher than the other, but any elevation advantage that you gain is going to be quickly eaten up by tall pine trees. But when my wife and I took a short trip out of town, we were able to increase the range of those radios to around 5 or 6 miles. This other area that we visited was much more open, and while there were some trees, there were significantly less, and there was also a lot less houses. But increasing your elevation probably is one of the best ways to increase your range. Radios like this are a line of sight communication method, and the best way to increase your line of sight, whether it's with a radio or with your own eyes, is to just go higher. That's why boats and ships mount antennas as high as they can, and it's also one of the big reasons why people who live in areas with mountains can communicate with these kind of radios over longer distances. Driving up the side of a mountain could allow you to communicate for dozens of miles below. Another thing that can affect how a radio performs is how it's set up. The included antenna has a magnetic base, so you should be able to stick it on the center of most vehicles' roofs. But having a Jeep with a non-metallic roof does make this a challenge. Antennas, they do need to be mounted to something metallic in order to be grounded properly, and not doing this can cause some significant performance issues. When I first got a hold of it, I kind of experimented with some different places on my truck. First, I just stuck it on the front of my truck's bed, but the cab interfered with the signal. Then I stuck one of the small metal discs that came with the radio to my truck's roof and mounted the antenna there. However, that very small piece of metal was not enough to properly ground the antenna, so that didn't really work well either. Finally, I stuck it on the hood of my truck, and that was the best I was able to do. But I'm probably going to upgrade the antenna to something longer in the future. Doing that's going to allow me to communicate over further distances. It's going to improve the clarity of my transmissions, and since it's going to be a permanent installation, it's always going to be properly grounded. Another thing that I could do setup wise is wire the radio's power cord directly to my truck's battery. Plugging it into the 12-volt port on my dash like I am now can result in unwanted noise, and way to reduce that is to just wire it directly to the battery. One downside to GMRS radios is that you will need a license in order to use them. But going through that process really isn't all that difficult. You don't have to take a test. It's only $35. It's good for 10 years. And anybody in your immediate family can use your radio system. So that includes your spouse, it includes your kids, your parents, and it also includes your in-laws. And another nice thing about GMRS radios, especially one like this, is that they are very easy to use. They're really, in some cases, not that much more complicated than an FRS radio that pretty much everybody's used. When I was showing my wife how to use this so that she could help me for this video, it probably took me less than a minute to explain everything. Overall, when it comes to this specific radio, it's a good, inexpensive way to get into GMRS, and the kit and all the pieces that it comes with would be sufficient for off-roading or communicating on a very large piece of property, even a farm that has roads going through it. But since y'all are probably preppers wanting an emergency communication method, I do think it would be a good idea to upgrade that antenna and go through the work of permanently installing the radio by wiring it to your battery. Ham or amateur radio is the most powerful radio service that you can use. While GMRS is limited to 50 watts, you can go all the way up to 1500 watts with a ham radio. With the right equipment and right conditions, you could literally communicate with somebody on the other side of the planet. However, all that additional power and capability does make ham radio significantly more complicated to use. Like with GMRS, you will need a license to use that, of course, while society's up and running, and you'll also need to take an exam to get that license. But going through that process is probably a very good way to start learning the ins and outs of a more complicated radio system. So between these three radio services, FRS, in my opinion, it's good to have, but it's not powerful enough to be considered your only backup communication method. GMRS, it's nice because it gives you a little bit more power, a little bit more range, and it's not so complicated that most people can't pick it up easily. And if you're able to access repeaters or set up your own, you really could communicate over a significantly large distance. But if you have the money and you have somebody in your family who has kind of some technical aptitude, I think it would be a good idea to have at least somebody in your group go through the process of getting a ham radio license. They could go ahead and figure things out while things are still relatively normal. Haha. But if things go really bad, of course, they could teach other members of your group to use that. But if you are going to invest in these kind of technologies, it is a good idea to have at least some of it stored away in a Faraday cage. So if we, say, experience an EMP, you will still have at least some way to communicate with others. And radios are not the only kind of technology that you would want to have after a collapse type situation. So if you want to see other kinds of technology that you would need in kind of a long-term disaster situation, go ahead and check this video out. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.